Hi, A Heart for Homeschoolers. Welcome back. I know I've been away for a while, but I am still as passionate as ever about homeschooling. This homeschool podcast was done before I took a hiatus, but it is timeless and full of wisdom. In this episode, I chat with homeschool dad Jason Esters. Jason is the host of the Black Men Homeschool Podcast and is also a community college professor. In this episode, we talk about several key issues pertaining to the Black homeschool community. Specifically, Jason shares how he and his wife, both educators, became homeschool parents, the impact of fathers and community in homeschooling, the rise of community colleges and post-secondary education, as well as what he thinks the future holds for the public school and homeschooling communities. All right, so I have been looking forward to this interview for a long time. I am here with Mr. Jason Esters from the podcast of Black Men Homeschool. Welcome, Jason, to A Heart for Homeschool. I am so glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here. It's been a long time coming.
I know, right?
I sit down and talk.
Yeah, I first heard about your podcast online, I think in a Facebook group, or I saw something on social media and I was super excited and impressed. I immediately went to listen, shared it with my husband, because I feel like you and your co-host occupy a space that is, it doesn't have a lot of voices. There's a few fathers that talk about homeschooling, but there are very few Black fathers that I see passionate and giving voice to aspects of homeschool. So I applaud you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And one of the important things about what we do is say to ourselves that, we aren't special in the sense that we're the only Black fathers that are out here doing this. I think the true reality is that they just don't have podcasts. They just aren't on social media. The brothers are out here and they're being good husbands and being good fathers and being good examples. And we just want to not just shed a light on it, but also be a bit of a beacon to let other brothers know that, hey, we're out here sharing the conversations of what it means to be Black men who are deeply involved in the education and the liberation of our children.
Amen. I love that, because I feel like that is a huge misconception out there. There are so many Black fathers, including my own husband. Now, he doesn't teach the classes, but I promise you, if it was not for him and his support and being just a rock and my sounding board, cheerleader, principal, all of those different things, we would not be able to continue homeschooling as we've done. So I really appreciate it that you guys are out there giving voice to, Black men, especially Black fathers, and whatnot. So I want to start off. I want you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you and your family got started homeschooling.
All right. Well, I am a lifelong educator. I was first trained to be an educator as a sixth grade English teacher. So when I was in college, I went to a teacher education program and did that. But even before that, I really knew that teaching was the thing that I wanted to do. And when I was in high school, this is interesting because I don't really talk about this much. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to work with an individual who's named James Meredith. I'm originally from Mississippi, even though I've been living in and around the Philadelphia area for the past 20, 25 years. But as a teenager, I got a chance to work with a man named James Meredith, and he, in many circles, is a legend because he was the first man to integrate higher education in Mississippi at the University of Mississippi. And Mr. Meredith had this idea. He had this idea that everybody in a community should be able to teach everybody else. So what he did, and we lived in the city of Jackson, Mississippi. What his idea was to take an old abandoned grocery store and create something that he called the library school. And in the library school, he said that everyone should be able to teach anyone else from the ages 8 to 88. That was kind of his mantra. And so he took this old abandoned grocery store and he put tables in there and shelves. And he said, listen, on weekends, we're going to come here and this is where the education is going to happen. And I'm all of 17, 18 years old. I meet Mr. Meredith in the grocery store, in an actual open grocery store. And he's like, you want to come work with me? I'm like, sure, why not? Now, me and my 17, 18-year-old mind, I know his name, but I don't really know his history. So I don't realize I'm sitting beneath wisdom at the time. I'm like, oh, Mr. Meredith, he's going to give me a job. I'm going to work with him. We're going to do this library school thing. This is going to be cool. And so on the weekends, I would go on Saturdays to this grocery store and I would give my knowledge to people that would come in and they would give knowledge to me. And in a lot of ways, that experience just never really left my mind. So, going into education and trying to become a high school teacher and then realizing, man, I'm really passionate about college teaching and doing all that thing. So teaching is always in my mind. When I met my wife, who happens to be a mathematics instructor, and she was teaching in high schools, we'd always dreamed when we were just courting one another, we'd always talked about, man, maybe one day we're going to have our own school. So having the school, quote unquote, was always part of the vision in our heads. Now, in our minds, of course, part of the dream was to have this big brick and mortar school where we could teach things the way we want to teach and all this kind of stuff. But it seems like we were always warming up for the school. And by warming up, what I mean is that we would do after school programs together, or we would do SAT prep programs together. I would do the writing and the English, and then she would do the math. And we thought, oh, well, maybe we'll continue to work in institutions together to figure out what it means to, run a school. And, long story short, we have a very long relationship. We have long distance relationship. We finally get back together and we actually get married. And then when we end up getting married, I'm teaching at an HBCU. I'm teaching at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and she's teaching at an independent school. And the dream of having our own school is still there in the background, but we kind of living life, doing stuff, making bread for the family. We're teaching, we're doing good stuff, but we start to have children. And our idea was that when we have children, we're going to, wherever they're going to be educated, we're going to be a major part. And since my wife was teaching at the time, she was teaching at this independent school. The idea was, okay, when the kids are of age, then they can go to school where she's teaching. We're thinking about it being a decent school, and it seems like it'll be a good place to be. Well, my oldest son is of school age, and the year prior to him being a school age, he has a diagnosis. He's diagnosed on the spectrum. Now he's very bright, he's pretty articulate, very social, but he still has this diagnosis in the back part. So when he's applying to attend the independent school where my wife works, of course, we informed them of the diagnosis. And so that played a factor in how they related to him when he came in for his preschool interview. Now, let me tell you something. It seems to me really interesting how schools will sometimes interview kids, because I'm always thinking about, well, who's the interview for? Is it for the kid, or is it for the individuals to figure out, who run the school, to figure out, well, how's the kid gonna fit? Now, keep in mind, this isn't a job interview. This is a preschool interview. So during the preschool interview, I was not there, I was working. But after the preschool interview, it seemed as if, my son did the things that he usually does, which is talk and ask questions and, be the preschool, precocious preschooler that he was. So after the interview, they sat my wife down and they said, listen, we think he'll be great here, but and next year he's supposed to be in kindergarten, but we want to hold him back a year. We want to hold him back a year so that he can get acclimated to the way we do things. And at that point, we were stuck because this is the very beginning of his education career. in a place. And in a maybe 3.5 hour interview, you've already decided that my son needs to be held back. Now, my son does have a diagnosis, but as a pre-kindergartner, he could write his own name. He could write all the letters of the alphabet. He could count well beyond 100. He knew all the states. He knew all the countries. He knew all of the periodic tables. So you want to put him into a classroom in pre-K where kids are still learning how to print letters and print their name. Now, if he wasn't a problem before, he's definitely going to be a problem now, because he's going to be bored to death in the class that you want to put him in because you think his behavior isn't up to par and you feel like he needs an entire year to figure that thing out. So at that point, we realized that, you know what, maybe we need to take the dream of having our own school and turn it into a reality right now. Now, we were in a bit of a quandary because my wife had already signed her contract to work at this school.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're in a position where you basically reject my kid, but now I got to work for you.
That's hard.
Yeah. And it's also like you don't want to kowtow to their perception of who your kid is. Mm-hmm. So at that point, we had 2 children. We had one on the way. And because I had just changed jobs, I wasn't working at the HBCU anymore. I was working at a community college. I had the flexibility to say, okay, you know what, baby, you go ahead and do what you're going to do at the school, and I'll teach the kids. So I had because I was teaching at a community college, they offered a lot of night classes and evening classes. So I switched my schedule to teach only night classes so that I could be home with the kids during the day. And that really started our homeschool journey. And it's a little bit different. It's a little bit unique in that, you know, for the first couple of years, I was the primary homeschool teacher because I was able to teach them during the day and work at night. So, and that was our lives for a good bit. And you know, that was over 12 years ago, right?
Wow.
So we've been homeschooling for a long time, and in that time, my role has changed, right? So there was a time when I was the primary teacher for homeschool, and then my wife got out of her contract, realized she was ready to go, left that job, and then she became the primary homeschooling parent. And I pretty much still worked nights, but I would oftentimes work at night, teach community college classes, but I would also substitute teach in the school district of Philadelphia during the day. So I would kind of tag team to make sure we had enough income, because we need to transition from being a 2-income household to being a 1-income household. And those of you out there who have ever had to make that transition, you know it's not easy.
We had to do it, and trust me, I understand.
Yeah. So it's a thing. So in making that transition, I worked a lot of hours as a substitute teacher in the school district of Philadelphia. And that's a story in and of itself. But what I will say is that when we made the transition into homeschool, we would have those days when we questioned whether we were doing the right thing or if we were doing it the right way. You know, 2 separate bodies of questions, right? But when I would step into my role as a substitute teacher, and I would go into different classrooms, and I would substitute in elementary schools and in middle schools and high schools, it would always reaffirm our choice. It would always reaffirm.
Yes.
Sometimes you need those reminders of, hey, I'm making a tough choice, mm-hmm. and it's hard and it's difficult, but this choice is necessary because there are other hard choices that people have had to make where they don't have control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that is, to me, also, I think something that I see a pattern of. You see a pattern, or I see a pattern now of former educators or people in and around the public school system choosing to homeschool, and our experiences and interactions with the public school reaffirms and convinces us, you know, that our decision is sound. Now, I know sometimes people have to change or switch, and they do have to send their kids back to public school. So I try to always keep a somewhat balanced perspective on it, but it's a minefield trying to navigate all of that, and I just see educator after educator,
Right. Because
constantly.
educators know. Educators understand what it can and should look like. And, I'm of the mind, and not everybody agrees with me, but I'm of the mind that, there are very, 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 very few bad teachers in the profession. But there are a lot more bad situations that you put teachers in.
Mm-hmm.
In those situations, after they've been traumatized by them long enough, they become bad teachers. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I really think that, there's nothing wrong with public school in and of itself is not a bad thing. I love school. Like I love public school, but you know what I love most? I love schools that work. I love learning environments that work for the kids that are in them.
Mm.
And us having the freedom to be able to say, this situation is not the best for my kid. I want to put them in this situation. That's the control that we need. If we're going to do education differently, then it has to be tied to our own agency. We need to be able to pick up our ball and go home and say, okay, we're going to rethink how we want to do this and have our kids in a place where they can grow. And we as a family can be free to pursue that. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about homeschool. And this is something great about being a homeschool dad too. Like I said, I started off, doing the teaching, and then I transitioned to, being the support and a provider. And then we had another transition, like right before the pandemic into the pandemic, where both my wife and I were home. And so we were able to co-teach, right?
Yes.
Now we're
Mm-hmm.
coming out of the transition where, our co-teaching isn't just for our family, but also for, other homeschool families as well. And, I'm still basically sliding back into being primarily provider, but also having, like one day a week when I can teach my kids and other homeschoolers that are in our community. So, it's not supposed to be, it doesn't have to be one thing, one way. The goal is making sure that we can have that locus of control. And a lot of you Black dads out there, you're actually providing the freedom for your children and your families to pursue the kind of education that's best for them. So, being that rock, being that cornerstone for the family is vitally important. Just like any school needs a teacher and a principal and a faculty, facilities management person and a cook and a counselor and a secretary. Our homeschools have different roles that need to be filled too, and protector and provider and prayer warrior and encourager and financial backer and CEO. Those are positions too, and they don't have to be filled by one person.
Yes, you also did a video, an excellent video. I remember from I want to say Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars, where you highlighted um, just the thoughts from several different um, Black homeschool fathers. What do you think the impact for Black homeschool fathers can be, not just for their own families, but also for the community and the homeschool movement as a whole?
Thanks for bringing that up. For the teaching, I did a presentation on the importance of Black fathers as an active and intentional presence in homeschool. I had the opportunity to interview um, um, 5 Black homeschool fathers in my circle. Like I didn't go all over the nation looking for these guys. These are the guys who encourage me, who I look to for friendship, for fellowship, for advice, for confession. When I'm out of pocket, like this is my circle, right? And so they allowed me to just interview and talk to them about their homeschool journey. And I think it's important um, to have those conversations with other brothers because it's important for us to be a community amongst ourselves. One of the things that happens sometimes with homeschool is because we're our own independent entity. Sometimes we don't get a chance to build community on the outside. Now, we've done, especially in Black homeschool spaces, we've done a better job of allowing our kids to find different ways to interact. And, you know, uh, you're included in this, Kendra. Black women are phenomenal. Y'all are on the ball. Like y'all have built this wonderful, I'm gonna even say global community of Black homeschool women, mothers that are figuring this thing out, and a very very supportive community amongst one another. And I think one of the lagging connections in that is the way the brothers can build a community in and of themselves. We're men, and I'm speaking in a general sense, we're not gonna always talk about it unless we're in each other's presence. Like we're not gonna get on, yeah, on the phone and talk about a lot of stuff. A lot of times we'll connect by doing, right? So it's important that if there are other men in the space, that you have a place to kind of gather and share, do activities together, and that kind of thing. And so I think that's a missing component from homeschool in a way, which is there needs to be a stronger presence of men who are there to actually take a part in the education. And it doesn't have to be like during the day you pull your kids out and so they have to teach between 9 and 12 on a particular day. No, brother's probably out there trying to work, trying to make sure that the family survives. And that's the way that it should be. But there are lessons that grown men have to teach. There are lessons that men have to teach to young girls. And so then the question has to be, when are we getting those lessons in? In days gone by, when we look at our ancestors, there was a time when the young men would leave their mothers and then they would go on the hunt with their dads. Right. They would learn the ways of the tribe from their fathers by running with them, by being in the company of men. And if we're going to do education differently, if we're going to think about homeschool as a new world where we imagine education in our communities differently, then, men have to play a central role in that. Fathers have to play a central role in that. Uncles have to play a central role in that. And, how that role plays out is going to determine how our children look at community, because it's not just about them making sure they learn their reading, writing, and arithmetic, and it's not just about them becoming very confident critical thinkers. Those are all important, and we want to strive towards those goals. But it's also about how are we going to relate to one another? How are we going to love one another in such a way that we can resist the forces that come against us, and we can also, be nestled in a place where we, support and love one another as we get older. How does that look? We're only going to be able to reach that place if we see that thing being modeled. So, for the brothers, it might be, maybe it's one weekend a month where you say, hey, here's the thing that I want to do, or here are the things I'm going to do with my kids or the kids in the neighborhood, with my sons or with my daughters. And so one of the things that I think it's really important for us is to find those connections amongst brothers who are already deeply involved with their children, who are doing the work, and for us to relate to one another. And that connection might be made with men who are kind of doing what our families do, which is have taken their kids out of school in order to teach them. But it might be also connecting with brothers who are just deeply invested and committed in their children's education, even though their kids still attend brick and mortar schools. Because guess what? When you take your kid and when you sit them down when they come home at 3:30 and they're doing their homework, and you sit down with them and you say, man, nah, we need to rethink this. Yo, read this. Tell me what you think about that. My friend, you are homeschooled. Right?
Yes.
So even our perception of what homeschool is needs to expand. And it needs to expand because, I firmly believe, and I say this all the time, every Black family in America should homeschool in some way, shape, form, or fashion. All of us. We all need to find a way to do it. And it may not always look the same, and it might not always be the same from year to year, but we need to make sure we're in a position to educate ourselves and promote the kinds of values and information that are going to be important and self-sustaining for us.
Yes, you bring up some wonderful points. The first thing I want to respond to that I appreciate is I hear a lot of homeschool parents, when we first start off, at least everything is about trying to compare apples to apples with academic rigor, like you said, and critical thinking. But to me, over time, really, that's just surface stuff. The real depth, the real important things is important values and how, like you said, how to love one another, how to relate to other people, because that's how you are able to influence and impact your community and people's lives with the skills and talents that you have. So I appreciate that because while, of course, academics is important, I think relationship and values and discipleship are in essence just as important and not always emphasized. A lot of times, we want to emphasize, deschooling and the steps to homeschooling and choosing the right curriculum. And those things are important. But at the end of the day, you can have all the book smarts, you can have all the knowledge, and yes, you can compete. But if you haven't imparted how to relate to other people, soft skills, how to love each other, those kind of things, how to serve your community, then you're missing some critical things. And I love the fact that homeschooling really allows us to return to that. And then the second thing that I really appreciate you saying is that all of us as parents, whether we have kids in public school or we are homeschooling in the traditional sense where we are at home with our kids, that we should be doing some form of homeschooling. And I think that it requires a mindset change. We can no longer, a lot of times I hear parents that are disillusioned with certain things of what they're teaching, especially, for example, Black history is a good example of that in the school system. And we want to beat the school system up because they're not doing what we feel like they should do. But I think if enough parents realize, hey, you have the tools and the resources, you don't have to depend on a system to educate your kids. You can actually supplement and you can actually add to what they're learning. How empowering is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it requires us to have this mind shift thing that my children's or my child's education is not simply someone else's responsibility or that's someone else's job, but it's my job. If I don't like something that I see going on, or if I feel like there's a lack, there are a ton of outside resources apart from the public school that I can utilize to get my child what they need.
Right. And one of those most important resources is other people. Like one of the things that I'm so encouraged by, and you mentioned deschooling, and I love the concept of deschooling in the sense of I was raised with a certain perception of what school should look like. And as I'm trying to build a new reality for my children, I am also learning myself what things about school I need to toss away
Mm-hmm.
because they're impeding the growth of my children and also my own personal growth because it don't have to look like what I went through.
Yes.
So, one of the things that in my deschooling journey, one of the things that I came to realize probably like maybe in year three is that we ain't got to do everything on our own.
Yes.
Because I was fooled into thinking because I'm a teacher, like I know how to teach everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. Like I'm not really all that great with the babies. Like I'm not really all that great with the elementary school. All the way up to age fourth grade. Somebody else needs to take on that because I can do it, but it ain't my calling. It's not really my gift. Like somebody else would be better served in doing that. But when we're in charge of deciding who is going to be part of our community, that also means thinking about, well, who's going to be the community, who's going to be the team, who's going to be the people around us. that can help to build up our kids in the way that they can go. And that was really liberating for me to realize that, part of homeschool is the idea of community school. As
Mm-hmm.
human beings, we weren't created to do this thing by ourselves. We weren't created in any sense to be living life on our own. And then one of the cultural fallacies that oftentimes gets promoted, especially in America, is this idea of self-determination and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and
Oh,
doing it all on
yeah.
your own, all this other kind of stuff.
And it's a
But
straight up lie.
yeah, it's the pulling yourself up by your bootstraps thing is so interesting because when the idiomatic phrase was first created, it was a joke. It was a joke. It was said in a way to make you realize how ridiculous it is. You can't pull yourself. You can't gain any height or status by pulling up your belt and then pulling up your pants. You're just going to end up giving yourself a wedgie. So it was kind of like made in that sense, right? But we use it as a mantra for individual self-determinism, and it just falls apart in so many ways. But see, that's the kind of thinking that helps to aid ideas of American capitalism and notions of American exceptionalism, and this whole idea of, hey, we have something about us that makes us better than other people. I mean, they're the gentle kernels of white supremacy that get put out there in all these different kinds of places. But, just as those ideas create both a separation and ferment ideas of status that can be very damaging. We need to look at our foundations of what education is really about, how it's nestled in community, and what it means to be together, and what it means to be all on one accord, having those same values, having the same language, and having those people around us that can help us to do that thing. So when I realized that, oh, I don't have to do this thing by myself, I can, other people can be, part of what we're doing here in homeschool. I realized that, especially for Black families, our homeschool legacy isn't necessarily the same as like the mainstream homeschool legacy. Because then when I said, oh, this is about community, that connected me back to thinking about Mr. Meredith. That connected me back to thinking about how my parents grew up in like a one-room schoolhouse. That connected me back to thinking about, how the Black Panthers had movement schools. That connected me back to the legacy of, freedom schools in Philadelphia.
Yes.
That connected me back to thinking about how, our ancestors had to steal away to learn how to teach one another. Like it's a different trajectory of understanding. So if we are homeschooling, we have to be careful about feeling like we have to take on the weight of all of it on our own, because that weight is going to crush us.
Yes.
But if we do that thing in community, then we can, in many ways, share the burden. And as followers of Christ, we understand that there are certain burdens we're not supposed to take on anyway. What did Christ say? He said, my yoke is easy.
Okay, my burden.
My
Yes.
burden is light. My burden is light. And so that's another notion about values too. Being able to homeschool, I get to instill in my children the value, the spiritual values that are that ground me and ground their mother and ground our spiritual community also. So they can have a heart for God that's inherited in some sense from what we're teaching them, but they also have space to explore where that goes for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to switch gears now a little bit and ask about, so you are a community college professor.
Yes.
And I just graduated my oldest, and I have a sophomore in high school. And one of the things that I regret, or that I wish that I would have done with my oldest, is for her to do dual credit.
Mm.
Um, I came up with AP classes. Like that was the thing back when I was like forever ago. And I was fearful of dual credit because, what if she isn't ready for college level classes? This is on her permanent transcript. Can how, the test, can she pass the test that you have to take to be able to do dual credit? Can we afford, because like in Texas, I want to say like we have to pay for community classes.
Right.
How do you see, because dual credit has just skyrocketed, I mean, it has just made so many paths for homeschoolers and public school kids to graduate early, to get those classes. And here's the regret. Now, my daughter has to take some classes that she really, had she taken them at the community college with dual credit, she wouldn't have to focus her energies on things outside of her major. So, what are your thoughts as a community professor about dual credit and about the impact that the community college is now having?
I think for a long time, community college was this well-kept secret for people who wanted to explore education on their own terms. And one of the reasons why it was a well-kept secret is because it was buried underneath the stigma that community college was somehow a lesser form of higher education. And now, because of rising costs of college tuition, a lot of the inflationary costs that we're seeing today are driven by, tuition costs, which is very interesting, right? So that also with the the markers of lesson return that people are observing from, the value of what you get from higher education at the most prestigious colleges and universities. So, when you do a cost benefit analysis of, people who spend close to hundreds of thousands of dollars on their college education, what's the return on investment for them? Mm-hmm. And then when you look at the numbers, the return on investment is actually higher for people who've had an associate's degree or done a couple of years of community college. So in a financial sense, financially, it just makes more sense to at least think about doing, your general education credits at a community college where people take the same class, your first year and a half, everybody's taking the same classes because you just have to fulfill those requirements. So why not do those same classes cheaper somewhere else, right? But I also think that because for a time, everyone in America was homeschooling, quote unquote, right? Because if we're honest, they weren't homeschooling; they were just crisis schooling. They were trying to do what they could do at home, right? So, but because everybody was in that situation, it put a pause on the status quo, and then people began to reevaluate. And community colleges, for really the past, I would probably say like maybe 7 or 8 years, have really doubled down on dual enrollment because that high school community could be a huge money maker for community colleges. But, one of the things that community colleges have that most 4-year institutions don't have is they have rolling enrollment. So that means that you can enroll any semester, and so the application process, is less likely to reject you, right? In most community colleges. So when you're ready, community colleges are ready for you. And I think with dual enrollment programs, then your high schooler has an opportunity to get into the flow of college education a little bit quicker, right? They can, in many cases, they can complete their high school requirements and complete dual enrollment requirements in the same classes at the same time. And thus they can graduate from high school, with their official high school transcript, having college classes on them, and in some cases graduate with their high school diploma and an associate's degree at the same time. Now, I know there are lots of people who say, well, higher education doesn't do what it used to do, and going to college, isn't worth as much. But the reality is that a college degree is still the greatest indicator for, future success. It's the biggest difference when it comes to wages earned over time. It makes a difference. Some people might say, well, the college degree is what the high school degree was, 50 years ago. And I'm not going to argue that point. I see the rationale in it, but the reality is that, regardless to what kind of school you go to, higher education needs to be in everybody's future when they graduate from high school. But there's a lot of flexibility of what higher education can and should look like. I think with community colleges, students have more flexibility and freedom to explore the things that they may want to do, because a lot of kids don't know yet. And so it's a way for you to explore what colleges have to offer, what different degrees and certificate programs have to offer. Community colleges offer not just associate's degrees, so 2-year degrees, but many of them offer certificate programs or certification programs. And, you can get a certificate in things from in the sociology field, like social work, to computer programming, to medical billing. So you can get a head start on a particular career of interest. But also you have something that says, hey, I completed this. And getting a certificate means that you have hours that can go towards a terminal degree. But you can say to yourself, it can give you an opportunity to reset and pause.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be really powerful. The other reason that I think that community colleges are making a strong option is because they introduce students to technical careers, and also the trades, in a way that's very, very accessible. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, especially, you're in Black educational spaces and Black homeschool spaces, we talk about how important it is for, our kids to get a liberal arts education. Great, but let's see if we can get a trade in there too. Community colleges are a great place to do that. And of course, there are the traditional trades, like your HVAC, and then plumbing, and then carpentry, and electrical work, and welding. But a lot of these community colleges are also offering kind of like the high tech trades, automotive technology, high tech manufacturing, robotic engineering. So it can be a great springboard into areas like mechanical engineering, or even chemical engineering, that might go to a 4-year that you're going to go to a 4-year institution for. But if you haven't gone to a high school, or if you're in a homeschool environment where you didn't get that exposure to it yet, it's a great stepping stone into those kinds of careers. And you don't have to spend $45,000 to figure out if you want to do it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because the costs, you do have to weigh the costs now. I used to tell my students when I did teach in public school that it makes no sense to go and be $100,000 or more in debt for certain degrees. And bottom line, I love what you say about the exposure as well. Having the certificates and having the trade experience, things that, you have the option to work and actually earn a living wage with those things. And so you're convincing me. I think that with my second oldest and my youngest two children, I definitely am going to push for them to do community college, take classes at least, not just to defray the cost for going to a university degree, but my brother was a huge proponent for the trades and whatnot, and that there's so much out there that you can earn really good wages. But we got pushed in this whole go to college mode. So I definitely love the options that you mentioned about community college, which leads. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, go instead of go to college, go to college, go to college. I think it should be do higher education, do higher education, do higher education
Yeah.
somewhere in some way because you want. I think there's nothing more powerful than giving young people the power to choose and
Hmm.
giving them the freedom to choose. We are restricted in our power to choose when we're saddled with debt or when we're saddled with obligations that we feel like we have to complete. So if we can shorten the amount of money that we have to pay, we can shorten the duration of the obligation, then that allows us more freedom to choose. And that's what community college can do for a lot of people. And I would say to people listening, look at the community colleges in your immediate area. Look for the ones in your city or your county to see what they offer because dual enrollment doesn't look the same for everybody. Also, there may be colleges who have particular funds available for students that are in that county or in that state or in that city, students that are looking to go into particular areas of interest, students that are particular kinds of minorities. It's an assortment of opportunities that your community college may offer you. So don't turn your back on community colleges because it could be a great option for your kid.
And then I want to ask one final question. We've talked about, homeschool and the impact that it can have on our communities. We talked about the rise of the community college as an educational choice rather than an alternative or whatnot. What are your thoughts? What do you see is on the horizon in terms of how education is evolving? Like, do you feel as though, like, I've always kind of believed that the homeschool movement has some power to influence or impact public school to consider reforms, like to really take a look at how they can reform things so that there's not a mass exodus. There's been an increase, a marked increase in the number of homeschoolers, but I think the result hopefully will be that some of the things that we complain about or that we know are harmful in the public school system, that officials and administrators will then be pushed to actually reconsider some things and change. So what are your thoughts on the future of education?
Oh wow, the future of education. And so I would say that I think the future for public education is going to be in transition and turmoil for a while. I think as homeschoolers, I think one of the things that's good is that we're looking for ways uh, to control our own narrative for what school is going to be. But those institutions which have kind of orchestrated and controlled education, public education, still exist. And
Mhm.
so I think that the shift that needs to happen now is more people need to question and not just question, but look to tear down and then rebuild the institutions of education. Pulling ourselves out is a start, but we have to
Mhm.
pull ourselves out in order to go back and get some other folks. Now, there are really good people in public education working to make significant change, getting more black males in classrooms, getting more professional development for teachers, getting more support for teachers, making sure that school days are actually shaped in such a way to keep kids interested, holding parents accountable
Mm.
for the way their children act and behave in school. Like these are moves that are happening in in public education today, and they're necessary. But then one of the questions has to be asked: how much time and effort am I going to put into bringing new timber to a burning building?
Hmm.
Now, I believe in the effort, but I also believe that for those of us who have the ability to pull back and fight from the outside, we need to continue to ask the question of, what do we want it to look like? Because I feel like, education isn't just a privilege; it's a right. It's a right for all people should be able to get an education in these yet to be United States. That should happen. That should happen. What's going to happen in order for that to happen? What's going to happen in order for that to be a reality? And because we have so many contending forces that are, at war, whether it could be political, national political forces or local political forces, all of these things are tearing at our local public school districts, wherever we are. And we could talk a whole another 2 hours
I know,
about
right?
what some of those fights are around and what they're called and how they're stigmatized and all that kind of stuff. But I think all of those fights are going to continue, and they're going to put more strain on public education. And I think that for those of us who have committed to homeschooling our children, we need to ask ourselves, now that mine are kind of good and I'm figuring stuff out for mine, how can I take what I've learned in teaching mine and give that to somebody else so that they can have a pathway towards freedom. And in that project, I'm excited to work with other homeschoolers. I'm excited to work with other people, teachers in public school. Like I say, I love school. I love schools that work. I love teachers that work and teachers that care. So we can find a way to use our talents and our gifts, to help these children out here, because they're the ones who have no control over where they're told to go or do at 8:45 in the morning. And wherever they are, whether they're in a homeschool context, whether they're in a community school context, whether they're, under a tree with a book, or whether they're in, a public school, they deserve to get the kind of learning that's going to set them free. And that's what our goal is together as educators. We got a
Awesome.
lot to go, but
Yeah, we do.
I think we're making the moves. We're making the moves to get there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for this insightful and highly engaging interview. Where can people check you out?
All right. So you can find me and my podcast partner, Richard Smith, on our podcast, Black Men Homeschool. You can find that podcast on Apple, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, Anchor, wherever you get your podcast, you can find it. You can also find us at our website, www.blackmenhomeschool.com. We're also we have a Facebook group, so you can find us on Facebook, and we're active on Instagram and Twitter, so you can find us on the interwebs as well. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this interview. I'm going to